Hi everyone. My name is Caroline. I live now in Lee, Massachusetts, but actually am from Framingham, Massachusetts, the bedroom of Boston, where there is absolutely nothing. And you know, I moved out here about 3 years ago, and Berkshire County is really unique in the sense that it does have these opportunities that sort of built into us here. And you also have a demographic that's really receptive to new and local and import replacement, where the burbs, where I'm from, is not really as much. So Alex wanted me to bring in examples of my product. Does anyone know what hand spinning is? How it happens? It's basically I take the raw fiber, which I get from local farms. This is an example of some raw fiber I've got in Hoboken, New Jersey. And I'll talk more about where I get my sources from. But I take this raw fiber and I spin it using a 12th century invention, a spinning wheel, totally foot powered, and I create yarn, which then people can knit with, they can weave with, and produce that clothing. So this is what I make, piles and piles and piles of this. And you're more than welcome to come up and touch. I have a very touchy business. People like to feel my product, smell it sometimes. But I initially started, do I just press the space bar?
It's actually the podium. Yep.
What do I do with the podium?
You press the space bar.
Sorry. Oh, press that space bar. Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. So I started selling my yarn for two really basic reasons. I started when I was 20 years old. I was in college. I had started spinning when I was about 16 years old. It was actually because I worked at Hancock Shaker Village out in Pittsfield, my summer job. So I learned how to spin there, to spin for all the visitors that came. Fell in love with it, but I absolutely hate to knit. I hate knitting. I really don't even like weaving. So I was making piles and piles of yarn. I refused to stop, but it was just sort of clogging up my really, really tiny dorm room. And all while that was happening, I wanted to buy more fiber, but my, income was getting smaller and smaller. So I wanted to find a way to get this stuff out of my house and to get it to other people who are going to use it, because really, what's the point of making yarn if it's not going to be knit up into something? So it was a really sort of basic and very 20-year-old mentality as to why I started the business, but it's really sort of evolved from there. And I will sort of say this is not my full-time job by any means. This is my late hours job, and I can talk more about that. So this is sort of the progression of where my business has gone in the past, now going on 5 years. So in 2010, I started selling my yarn at campus events, craft fairs, farmers markets. If you want to start moving out into the business, farmers markets are really great because they have a very low participation fee. It's usually about $25, whereas your larger craft fairs are anywhere from $50 to $200. And then in 2011, I finally sort of started that branding process, created a website, all free, social media, free, online sales, free. I made sure I wasn't investing any money into this because I had no idea where it was going to go yet. 2012, I started selling consignment to a bunch of different sort of boutique-y retailers and other museums that would sell my yarn, and then I'd get a portion of it back. It was usually a 40-60 split, so I got 60% back. They kept 40. And it was just a way to move that product. In 2013, I started to introduce a lot of new products, and I'll talk about that sort of product diversity. And then last year, my sort of new step was I started to teach, because the people I was talking to when I went to these events were really interested in the process, and that was something that I was already doing, so might as well share it with other people. So my most challenging part of my business is that I have a very, very, very small market. And it's small for 3 reasons, really. It has to be a proficient knitter or crafter, because your beginners aren't going to be spending a lot of money on yarn. They get very timid about it. They have to be interested in either handmade, local, or socially conscious products, so that they're not going to be buying that bargain bin yarn that you can get at AC Moore. And then they have to have enough discretionary income to spend the money. And I'll talk more about the sort of pricing concerns that I had. So what was happening is my yarn just was not selling. People would buy it here and there, but I wasn't selling enough. And so I wanted my name to get out there some way for them to get my business card, for them to think about me next time, think about me for a gift for your aunt or your grandmother. So I called it a calling card. And they were an item that was under $20, that was sort of loosely related to my product, but that you could buy if you weren't a knitter, you didn't have a lot of money, and you weren't, totally into the local thing. You go a little bit. So I created felted soaps, which are, I have a love-hate relationship with these guys. They sell like crazy whenever I go out. People really like them. It's sort of a novelty. Some people haven't even heard of felted soaps, and everyone uses soap. So why not try something new when you're out somewhere? It has my information right there, so I'm pushing that product. But these things are a real pain in the ass to make, and I don't enjoy making them at all. But it's something I have to do, especially when I'm going out, because I need those products there. Otherwise, I'm not going to have any merchandise move, and I might not even make my fee back. I've tried lots of other products too. I've made handmade knitting needles, I've made ornaments, I've made home decor, these guys are actually very popular. In addition to the felted soaps, I have little monster soaps for kids. Those are much more popular. And I felt sort of frustrated because I felt like I was just making stuff to sell, but it wasn't actually what I wanted to be selling, which was the hand-spun yarn. So the reason why it wasn't selling, one of the big reasons that I thought, was because of the price. It's when you're doing local, when you're doing import replacement, especially when you're doing handmade, price is just going to stack up and up. So I have a question for you guys, and you won't hurt my feelings. How much would you spend? How much would you pay for this? You won't hurt my feelings. I've heard a lot worse. 15. $5? Yeah. $5?
24.
24? $10? Okay. And that's totally normal because, $5, let's say about $8 is what you can buy yarn that's spun commercially, about this much, about $8 at a nice knitting shop. So that's sort of about there. Problem is I spend a lot more on that. So I'm sorry that this is a lot of numbers. But I calculate my price per ounce because that's how I buy the fiber. And I divide them between two major types, domestic and luxury wool. So domestic is sort of your average sheep breed. Luxury is like your merino, your alpaca, Angora. And I pay about $2.50 an ounce for the cheap stuff and $3.50 an ounce for the luxury stuff. I have about 4 ounces or so. So I spend about $10 for one of these. It takes me 5 hours to spin this. So if I do the math, when I first started out in 2010, I was paying myself 90 cents an hour to make this. And that's with no profit. That's just for how much money do you get for the time that you've put in. And now, which I think I'm at $25 and $30 for those two price points, which I'm pretty comfortable with. People seem okay with it. When they're buying hand-spun yarn, they're thinking about $20 to $30. But I only make $3.10 an hour, which is not even minimum wage, right? That's at the worst state in, Missouri, it's not even $3.10. So the suggested formula, when you go to places like Etsy, and they're encouraging people to start their own handmade businesses, this is the formula that they tell you to use. Your materials cost plus $10 an hour, plus how many hours you're putting into it, times 2, that equals your wholesale price. So that's if you're selling them outright to a store, that's going to upmarket. Or if you're selling it yourself, times all of that again, that's your retail. So if I actually did that, my yarn would cost $240 a skein. Would you pay $200? I wouldn't pay $240 a skein. So that's where my sort of dilemma is, right? So do I continue to pay myself $3.10 an hour? Or do I up the price so much that no one is going to afford it and no one's going to buy it? So that's the sort of limbo that I am. And that's what's forced me to start to diversify and make this stuff that I'm really not interested in making, but I'm just trying to beef up those sales.
Doesn't it sound like too though, like educating your buyer why I'm so I might say 10 because I have no idea
Right.
what the value is.
It is. It's a lot about that, and that's what I spend most of my time at these events doing, explaining what is hand spun, what does natural mean, what is the importance of it being local. And sometimes I convince people and they'll buy it, and sometimes I can't. You know, it's still not worth it. But even if you convince someone and someone really understood the value of local, natural, and handmade, $240 is still not reasonable, right? So that was my problem. So I started to sort of really try to understand the psyche of these people I was meeting and people who were buying or not buying my yarn. And so I wanted to know, why were they buying what they were, and why were they paying what they were? And what I realized was really disturbing, and it was people just weren't thinking about it at all. They really weren't thinking about where their clothing was coming from. You know, we're sort of in a place where thinking about your food comes sort of naturally now to us. Thinking about where your clothing comes from, we're not quite there yet. But it could be arguably just as unsustainable as what our food production is like. So although it was not my initial intention to be a mission-based business and a product replacement or an import replacement business, it's become that way because, you know, I sort of thought, you know, nobody's thinking about where this stuff is coming from. They should be thinking about it, and I should be thinking about it too. So although I was already doing those things naturally because it's sort of inherent of having this business, you know, you work with farmers because that's where the wool is. But really becoming intentional about it was a sort of shift for me. So what makes the clothing business really unsustainable has sort of three factors in my mind. One is what it's made out of. Two is where it's coming from. And three is the fact that people just aren't conscious of it. So I have a little activity for you to do, if you could. If you can reach your own tags, or if you want to get friendly with your neighbor, ask them to look at your tags. If you could write down on the little scrap of paper that Alice handed out where it's made and what it's made out of. And make sure to list the secondary ingredients because it could be 5% something, and that's almost always that hidden acrylic in there. So, all right, so there's not a ton of people, so why don't we just sort of share, if you want to share like what the item of clothing is and where it came, or let's start with what is it made out of. So I will start. Not on purpose, but I actually ended up dressing very natural today. My dress is shockingly 100% cotton. The hat I was wearing is wool and cashmere, which are both natural. My boots are leather, although there is some kind of polyester thing on the inside that they're not identifying. And my tights are fleece lined, so they're polyester and spandex. So it's really, my tights are the most unnatural. So I want you guys to know that just because I'm conscious of it, and probably more ways than everybody else, doesn't mean that I don't have trouble dressing naturally either. It's really, really hard to do it. And it's really, really hard to dress locally as well, almost impossible. So, you want to share what your stuff is made out of?
Yes, I have, like, my sweater is cotton, nylon, and angora. And then my tank top is cotton and is it modal or MODAL, I think it was?
Yeah, if it's a capital letter, it's going to be a synthetic because that's a brand.
Capital.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's probably a type of synthetic. And I'll just advance the slide.
And I don't know what the shoes are.
Don't know what the shoes are.
Made of. Yeah.
What about you?
My sweater is made in Vietnam and it's polyester and elastic, and the boots are leather and made in China.
My blazer is made in Vietnam. It is 70% polyester, 25% rayon, 3% wool, and 2% spandex. Oh, and the lining is 100% polyester. My sweater is made in China. It's 100% acrylic, and my shoes, I have no idea what they're made out of, but they were also made in China.
My shirt is polar fleece from China. My jeans are denim cotton made in Mexico. My t-shirt is 100% cotton from Bangladesh. And my belt is leather from New Mexico.
That's the most local of the bunch,
That's
other than the vintage. So, if you had any acrylic, nylon, polyester, rayon, spandex, latex, or Kevlar, this is what you're wearing. It's oil. It's a byproduct of oil. Does not breathe. It is not good for your skin, and it isn't good for the environment either. But that's what the majority of our clothing is made out of, and that's what the majority of the clothes in stores are made out of. And just so you know, it's sort of a similar step in the byproduct as our plastic bottles, our water bottles, disposable ones. So if that doesn't sort of gross you out about what we're wearing, and just thinking about, although we don't know what the consequences are yet, that is touching our bare skin oftentimes, and what that's going to do to our health. Right, we have no idea what that is going to be, because that's a fairly new thing, right? We are of the plastic age, but several generations ago was not that case.
This jacket was made in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
So just not that long ago.
Right.
Everything was still 100% wool.
Right. So I do all natural, but it was really not on purpose. I spun natural because I hated the squeaky noise that the synthetic stuff made. You can buy raw polyester to spin. It's called Firestar, and big sort of yarn stores sell it, but it made a terrible noise, sort of like nails on a chalkboard, and it felt gross in my hand, so I wasn't going to spin it. And why did it feel gross in my hand? Because it's oil, because it's plastic, because it's man-made.
Is it cheaper than
No,
natural?
in that case it's more expensive. And it's more expensive. This is sort of an unusual industry in that it tends to be more expensive to buy from larger companies than from smaller farms. And I don't know if that's because these smaller farms are underselling themselves yet. I mean, I haven't talked to farmers who directly work for the fiber market. And that is something to understand about the sort of farming community, is a lot of them are going to be, their businesses is to produce fibers, to produce either raw fiber or milled yarn for the knitting community, and that's sort of their business. But I don't know if that's a reflection, if they could be increasing it. But no, Firestar, the acrylic stuff is more expensive. It's usually for people who want something hyperallergenic, although there are natural ways to do that. There are treated wools, which do have some chemicals in them, but at least they're still supporting the local farming industry. So I sort of didn't do this on purpose, found out really, you sort of loosely know, like we all sort of know that polyester isn't, natural, right? We all know that it's probably something bad, but we don't always think about it on a daily basis. So the second part is, where is it made? And that's really more about this import replacement. So other than New Mexico and virgin wool from the USA, and then something, designed in the USA, everything else was where? There was one Mexico, right? Your jeans were from Mexico.
Vietnam and China.
China, Vietnam, Eastern Asia collectively dominates the production and export markets of inexpensive clothes. So this is actually a map of H&M's clothing. So most of it's coming out of China. You have a little bit in sort of poor Eastern European countries because, again, you can sort of exploit labor there too and inexpensive manufacturing, but none of it is coming from the United States. Not even a shade of red is happening there. The majority of it is going to be India, Vietnam, Turkey, China, and Hong Kong is where our stuff. Target is almost exclusively China and Vietnam. Every single product, let alone their clothing lines. To make matters worse, talk about an unsustainable business. The cloth could be imported from China, but it could have been sewn in Vietnam, and then the product could be harvested from Thailand. So it's also making all of those steps. So not even one country is really benefiting from manufacturing the whole process and then exporting it. And those countries are losing that economic stability every single time you do it. So these are my suppliers, not in China. I do exclusively New England and New York. And again, this was something I was already doing, but wasn't really doing on purpose. I did it because I meet them mostly through fiber festivals. I don't buy online because it's really expensive. And with something that you want to touch it before you buy it. So I wanted to always make those sales in person. And when I did that in person, it was at these fiber festivals that mostly local farmers, small farms, were going to. So these are what I consider my repeat suppliers. So sometimes I've bought one thing from maybe somebody over here or up in Maine, but these are the people that I continue to go back to for product. And in fact, this person I use for custom orders, so if someone sort of calls me up and wants a specific color, I work with a woman who also is in Lee, Mary Consolati. I don't know if you know her.
I know Alice Field.
No. But Mary Consolati, she has Romney sheep on Consolati Farm in Lee, and she dyes to order. So if I have a customer that wants a turquoise color, she can do that dyeing for me there, and I have that product, and that's less than 2 miles from my home. And I always, whenever possible, try to promote these local small farms that are in this yarn. Sometimes I have them on the label, sometimes I just don't have enough room, but certainly when I'm talking to the customers, I remember where I got every single type of wool. I know what the farmer was like. I sometimes can remember their name, but I can certainly remember the name of their farm. And I list them all on my website, so there's some cross-promotional that way. And just sort of, an understanding that as a small business, I'm also supporting other small businesses. So these are just sort of additional information. I do really sort of small time. I have a website. I do online sales, but it's Square Up. I'm sure some of you might know what Square Up is. It's a free service, which is very nice. I used Etsy, but Etsy's very expensive if your product isn't moving, which is what I said wasn't happening with mine online, because I think people need to feel it. Knitters are very tactile people. They need to touch it. Obviously, I use Facebook to whatever extent I possibly can. That's free marketing. If you're more interested in the textile industry, you can go to fibershed.com. That's got a lot of great information. Lots of great sort of informational videos about it. You'll learn a lot. Massachusetts Sheep and Wool is the organization that puts on a lot of the local fiber festivals that I purchase from, and most of the farmers I work with are part of that organization. And then an interesting resource, if you are looking to go towards the handmade part, and especially if it has anything to do with textiles or sort of craft, Craftsy is a website where you can actually take online classes. Some of them are free, some of them you have to pay a fee for, but they teach you not only the skills, so how to knit, But they also have some small business courses. So how to balance your, accounting books, how to do social media, how to set up consignment. And it's a really great resource, specifically designed for handmade craft business owners. And then these are just sort of the free things that I exploited. Weebly.com is the website host that I use. They allow for you to have a free website. All I have to do is pay for my domain, which is like $40 a year, which is pretty reasonable. It's a great looking website, really easy to use. Square Up, like I said, it has not only the credit card transactions, which is that little square that you plug into your iPhone, but you can also have an online sales shop. And you pay the same fee that you would if the credit card was with you in person. Vistaprint, oftentimes if you keep a watch, they'll have a special where you can get 250 business cards for free. That's how I got my first run, and then after that it's $10. So also really reasonable, and they're great looking business cards. And then Artisans of Western Mass is not free, but it's a collective that I was part of for a long time. Other handmade artists that sort of do cross-promotional and a lot of support. And so I encourage you, even if you're not doing something handmade, to sort of look and see if there's a local brewery collective that you can get in touch with and learn from, and then also get that promotional information from. So that's all I have to say for the sort of, bottled presentation, but does anyone have any questions for me?
Do you make your soap that you wrap?
I do not, but the soap is handmade from a friend of mine. So it was a collaborative with another handmade artist that I met at a farmer's market. So she has, she calls them her ugly soaps. They're the ones that like the colors didn't settle right or they didn't cut right. So she can't sell them, but I wrap them with wool and no one can tell the difference. So I get a discounted price, and it also means that my soap is 100% natural as well, because that's her product. So I'm sticking with that. I'm not using a synthetic soap wrapped around a natural wool. That wouldn't make any sense.
How do you use your felted soaps?
How?
The soap comes through the felt?
Oh, yeah. So I've had to, talking, what you mentioned about having to educate your market, I've had to create a lot of signs on what felted soap is, what hand spinning is, and they've had to sort of be cute and cheeky so it didn't sound like I was preaching to the clientele. But yeah, so I've had to answer that question a lot. What it does is the wool shrinks with the bar of soap. It replaces your washcloth or your loofah, which is 100% plastic. And so it is that scrubbing, that exfoliant agent, but it's all natural. So, and it shrinks with it because wool naturally will felt. And what is my favorite part is it doesn't slip off your shower shelf, which is why I didn't use bar soap for such a long time, because it never seemed to stay on its little tray.
How do you actually wrap it?
You take the raw fiber, you sort of wrap it vertical and horizontal, and then you slowly submerge it in really, really hot water, and you sort of squeeze it out, and slowly it will shrink, and then you just start turning it over in your hands, the same way that you wash your hands, sort of moving the soap around and it'll felt. And so as you use it in the shower, the hot water, the shower, and the friction on your body, it's going to felt it more.
Interesting.
Do you want to talk any more about the educating your clientele part, like how that became almost, you didn't talk about how you're teaching now, like how that became almost part of your business?
Yeah, so I didn't bring it today because it's really icy and I know it's going to fall with it, but I usually bring my spinning wheel everywhere I go because people need a visual of how this is made. Most people haven't seen spinning done, so usually I'm actually demonstrating at these events, which is, has pros and its cons. Sometimes I'm just free entertainment for people and they don't buy my product, they just like to watch me and take pictures. But sometimes it's people, you see the light bulb go off of, oh, this is really how it's made. It just doesn't appear at Walmart, fully made on a shelf. And I did that because I struggled with how to explain what this was without a visual. and people were inevitably asking me how it was made, how do you get the colors, why is one wool more expensive than another, the sort of different, merino, alpaca, Angora versus Romney, Cormo. There are hundreds of different sheep breeds, and that's what I find the most exciting about it. They all sort of behave differently. So I spend most of my time at these craft fairs and at these markets talking to people. And my sort of adventure last year was really starting to promote teaching. And so I taught needle felting classes, which I don't have any here, but is another sort of craft that I did using wool, teaching spinning, also teaching knitting, to sort of promote this idea of making it at home. Even if you don't have the intention of making a business out of it, just try making it yourself. You make a really, a scarf that takes you 3 months to make, well, that's one scarf you didn't buy at Target, right? So, and you have an appreciation for how it's made. So I've started that. And it's been slow. There's a lot of interest in Berkshire County to sort of do it yourself. It's a very do-it-yourself type of community. But a lot of the time people just don't have time. And it's my big struggle with that is just getting my name out there beyond just postering and really encouraging people to look up my information. Museum education.
And do you follow that markup formula for the soaps to make up for the margins that are so tight on the?
No, I don't use the handmade formula because it would probably be $40. It's rather absurd. But I do make more of a profit off of the soap because one of these soaps takes me about 15 minutes to make, and that's really where the profit comes from. It's that this takes me 5 hours to make, or this takes me 15. And I get the soap discounted, so I'm trying to think. I make about $4 in profit. So I'm, making about $12, equivalent of about $12 an hour for making the soaps, which is why it's a better thing. But, you gotta think about it. This is 5 hours of enjoyment. This is 15 minutes of, pain and torture. So, which one do you want to do? So I make them, and people love them, and they're really popular, and people are always asking for them. But this is not how I'd like to be spending my time. But I will like to say that, this is my night job, and one of the questions that Alice asked me when we had sort of our preliminary meeting was how much money I made off of the business if I, felt like there was a profit. And to be totally honest with you, there isn't. But what it does do is I break even. I don't spend a dime on this craft, this art that I really enjoy. And that was what I set out to do, and that's what I've accomplished. So I'm able to buy all of my wool, and it's nothing out of my savings account. It's all from things that I've earned from selling the skein before it. And that's sort of at the goal that I am at the moment. And I really don't know if there's a model out there that would make this business sustainable to a point where I could quit my job and do it full time. I don't really foresee that, but I'm okay with that.
Do you visit with the Better Yarn store up in Lenox?
Mm-hmm. Wonderful things.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And can they buy some of your things?
They typically don't. Yarn stores like that don't tend to buy hand spun because you can't, or at least I can't, provide them the quantity that they want. So that's the other thing, is that what I love about this craft is the color and the variety. And if I were to spin 20 skeins of the exact same kind of yarn, I would just, be miserable. But that's what a yarn store needs, really. I mean, they need that quantity. I don't blame them for that. And I could make certain sacrifices to be more appealing to that market. But at the moment, I'm not willing to make that sacrifice. Because what I am ultimately afraid of is that I'll no longer enjoy it, right? And there are days that I have to spin because I have a craft fair that weekend, and I really don't feel like spinning, but I do it anyways because I need, volume out there. But it hasn't gotten to the point where I've sort of abandoned my initial passion in it. And that's sort of the fine line I'm trying to walk at the moment. Any other questions?
I have a question, but do you guys have any questions? Do you have a way that you'd like to, or maybe you might not even do it, but do you see like a way that we could scale this kind of business up? So I know you've looked at FiberShed, which is a really cool website.
Yeah, I mean, the sort of section of, or the sort of little tidbit of my business that I'm the most interested in is really in promoting the handmade movement. So if I were to expand, the way I would do it would really be more through a craft collective and offering more classes, more instructors, more sort of supplies and resources so that people can do this themselves. Lots of people ask if I have any interest in getting a shoe firm. I don't. That's not where my passion lies. That's where a lot of other people's passion is, and I love working with them, and I'm appreciative of them. But that's not the direction that I personally want to go. I'd much rather go in the direction of sort of expanding it and teaching, everyone how to knit and everyone how to be self-sustaining. Because that is something that we've lost, in the same years that we were wearing 100% wool or 100% cotton, a lot of people were still sewing their own clothes, knitting their own products. And part of that came out as just sort of a thrifty American lifestyle, but a lot of it sort of faded, even though perhaps we need it again.